Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in the space. This week, it's episode 9 of season 2. We're going to have a chat around Entra Permissions Management, a new product from Microsoft that aims to give you the visibility of the permissions within your multi cloud environment. Hey, Alan, how are you doing?
Hey Sam, I'm not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, all good, thank you. Very busy at the moment, so good. And we've continued to continued on our recording schedule, which is always always a positive thing, right?
Yeah,
So yeah, it's going pretty well.
yeah. Well, we've hit our episode 9, which is where we ended the last season. So
Yeah,
next
exactly.
episode we'll break that record for us, I guess.
Exactly. Right. Well, let's hope not. Yeah. Let's crack on around permissions management. Okay. So yeah, we're going to take a look at permissions management. Permissions management to both of us is relatively new. It's new to Microsoft and it's new to us. So I'm sort of going to be structuring. I'm sort of the quotes expert on this one, but we can't profess to be experts either of us in this side, and we probably know as much as each other, to be totally honest with you. So we'll probably end up taking this one a little bit together. Cool, right? Let's get started then, Al.
Okay. So what is Entra Permissions Management?
Okay, so Entra Permissions Management is a cloud infrastructure entitlement management product, and essentially what it's aiming to do is to give you visibility and control over permissions for your identities and resources in your cloud environments. Um, so so imagine all of the all of your identities and your users that have access to these cloud environments, understanding who has what permission, whether they should have permission, giving people permissions, revoking permissions, just in time permissions access. We'll go through it a little bit more in depth, but effectively, it's trying to allow you to get full visibility of those permissions, and not just in Azure. It does support multiple clouds, and we'll go through that in the future, well, in a bit anyway. But essentially, we're effectively discovering those permissions, documenting them. We're also applying a risk score to certain users dependent on their permissions indexes.
Okay, that's cool. So what features are in, or what are the main features at least in the Entra Permissions Management?
Okay, so I think the biggest, well, the first part to permissions management is discovery of permissions across your cloud estate. So so effectively, we're connecting permissions management to, say, your Azure resource, your Azure subscriptions. It's going to go away and it's going to scan those resources for you, and we've seen that happen pretty quick, haven't we? You sort of connect it, it starts scanning and gathering results relatively quickly. Is that right, Alan? It's within a
Yeah,
few hours, isn't it? It starts to come back
yeah.
with
I think it
information.
depends on size.
Yeah.
On our test environments, they're pretty small, so doesn't
Yeah,
take too long.
exactly. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
size of environment, and I think they recommend about 24 hours, don't they, to get it all to
Yeah.
index and everything.
Yeah, I do remember that actually. So let's say up to 24 hours to get, everything refreshed and scanned. And then what it's going to do is it's going to give you an interface in order to explore those permissions that it's found, right? So it's gonna detail out everything that it's got. You're gonna you and what I think as well is really interesting around it is that it can then go on. It can also then go on and um, it can then look at the actual activity of those permissions for those identities. So it's not just going to discover. It's not just going to tell you just what is happening with those with those identities and the access that they have. But then it's also going to compare. Okay, let's say Alan has got owner over a resource in Azure. Then it's going to look at presumably Azure activity logs to then understand what it is you're actually using, right? So it's like Alan's got, say, owner access to the whole subscription, but he actually, only accesses this one maybe resource group and maybe this one, resource. And then what it's going to be able to tell you is it's going to be able to do the difference between the two. And it's going to say, hey, Alan's got owner to everything, but he only needs, storage account reader or whatever it is that you're actually doing.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So that's another like from a discovery and visibility point of view, that is a massive part of cloud permissions, because I think and we'll talk about permissions creep and how that happens over time. But effectively, it is measuring. It is attempting to measure all of the permissions that you've given, that you've granted in your cloud environment, and then what is actually being used day to day.
And we've always said that, even with, I think it was last episode about um, Defender for Cloud, having that visibility of anything, knowing what you don't know, does is massive, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and usually what we seem to find with organizations is as soon as they know about things, they generally tend to act on them, right? And it's almost like the first part, the discovery, is almost the challenge for some organizations, right? Because and especially when you don't have an automated tool that can help you with it, right? Because could you imagine like trying to manage, okay, some smaller environments, not a problem to go and look at, what access people have got. Maybe you've just got a subscription or two with a few resource groups in Azure. Okay, I'm guessing that might be relatively simplistic. But if you're a really large organization that's maybe got a multi-cloud presence, and maybe you're a software company or something like that, where you've got a lot of cloud resources, trying to map who has what permissions at every like level, right? Because we have RBAC at multiple levels, don't we, with inheritance, and then trying to work that out manually is, I would say, effectively impossible, isn't it? Or you wouldn't try and undertake that, I don't think, manually.
No, not from the portal. I mean, potentially you can pull that stuff from the APIs and stuff to pull it quickly, but the analysis is still going to take just as long.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not going to give you that difference between uh permissions given versus permissions used, is it? You're just
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
going to be able to say, hey, Alan's got access to X, Y, and Z, but whether he's actually using it or not is another thing entirely.
Yeah, and I guess that's the part of it as well, isn't it? That could you go up to an engineer and say, do you need this role? I suppose some users or some IT guys will be like, yeah, no, I don't need it anymore. You can get rid of it, or no, I only need this. And there'll be some that'll be like, yeah, no, I need this. I need all these
Yeah,
permissions.
yeah, and you've got no way to also
Validate.
validate whether they
Yeah.
actually do or not. Yeah, and I think that's really important, isn't it? Because that's where if you do have like a compromised entity, sorry, entity identity, I should say, then you almost, it's not just a need to know, and I suppose it is, least privilege, thought process, right? Because that can start to get eroded away inside of an organization over time, right? The principle of least privilege. But just from a practical perspective, if one of your identities is say compromised, you know you really want to limit access to those things, right? We have other tools that can help with that, right? But some organizations, they're maybe not ready for like full just in time, access to certain
Yeah.
reasons. There are sometimes some political and other restraints going on there, and restrict, so we can't always have like this beautiful PIM just in time access going on. So it is important to, the way when I've scanned environments around it, it's always the well, like the people that look after it that have like some mostly have the worst, they're the worst culprits, right? You scan your own environment, it's like, okay, you're like, you know um GA to, well, not GA and owner to absolutely everything. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, you don't actually need that, do you? So and I think it can be used as a tool, in conjunction with, say, PIM, or something else, well, to justify PIM's existence. Not that PIM needs that much justification, but it is a good way to be able to fix a lot of these problems, right? Just in time access, because
Yeah.
you see some horrible numbers and you see horrible benchmarking. It's like, well, we can take a lot of that away just with PIM, right? To start off with, there's less default, permissions going on. And I think the next important feature of entry permissions management is to be able to right size permissions after the fact. So it can automate reducing a user's permissions, like in real time, in a semi automated fashion, isn't it, Alan? I think you have to like trigger it off, but it can go and do the legwork of actually revoking permissions and then assigning new sets of permissions, dependent on what you actually set. I,
Yeah, depending on the permissions you give it to the system. But yeah, you can do it. It can automate. You can, almost one button click that new role with those permissions, or it will give you the JSON, the code to be able to upload it into the portals itself. If you don't want to give it a writer sort of permission sort of thing.
yeah, yeah. So it's also there to help you remediate your permissions issues, right? Because we do have a lot of tools which are like great because they give you discovery, right? And then they're like, hey, here's all your problems, and then it's like, well, it's up to you to go and fix them. And sometimes, well, the well, I'll say the majority of the time, that can be quite a bitter pill for people to swallow, because it's like, hey, you've just told me everything that's wrong, and now I've got 6 months of of work that I now need to do. So if you can also take to them a solution which is like, well, if we do find you know a, you know not just the low hanging fruit, because low hanging fruit's relatively quick to fix in any remediation strategy, but if you can then say, okay, if there is a lot of stuff that needs to be changed, then we can start to automate and go through that process and fix those things.
It's that point, isn't it, of showing your cybersecurity team all the issues, and then them going, right, okay, here's a timeline, now go.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're
Yeah,
not having any either skills potentially, or
yeah,
the time to actually remediate, where you're right, having tools that can help with some, most, all of that remediation is
yeah.
great.
Yeah, exactly. And permissions management does have a bit of an overlap with PIM and just-in-time access, because I believe they actually have their own. And I haven't really looked into this because we sort of sit more on the PIM recommendation side, but I do believe it can do just-in-time access to certain permissions. Is that correct, Alan?
Yeah, I think you can set some like jobs. It's kind of like, you set this type of task. That was it. It's you set this task. This task is what someone does, and they can request to elevate into that role that allows them to do that task, kind of thing. I think. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, we've not looked into it properly, have we yet?
Okay.
There's so much of it.
And yeah, there is. Yeah, it's a relatively big product. That's for sure. There's a lot to discover with this product, I think. If you're looking at it for the first time and you're also not from this, cloud infrastructure entitlement management world, if you haven't used a tool like this before in the past. Um, and also, the last sort of big feature that I just want to call out is its ability to continuously monitor in the future as well. So as permissions creep and permissions change over time, it's there ready to alert on any new changes that happen in your environment. Um, and let's say that somebody they use the term of permissions creep index, PCI. And you can relatively easily see who has a large, a high permissions creep index, right? Who is who is up there. So you can also, if you're you can monitor over time, who your worst offenders are in terms of permissions creep. And it's usually not the actual person that's been given the permissions; it's the person that's granted them the permissions that have done the potential wrong thing. But we all know too well that you could elevate yourself for a certain amount of time, for a certain task, which might be legitimate for a certain amount of time, and then you forget to put yourself back, you know and that is why just in time access is so important. It's something that we sort of preach a lot, isn't it? Just in time access to anything. We ourselves, you know put in place with our customers, the idea of just in time access for us, connecting to them, right? We definitely don't want any sort of write access to them, at all times. So it is it's sort of it is a big change for some organizations to get their head around that, right? And to get themselves into that process of, yes, okay, we've got to set up, these just in time, groups and things like that. I don't think we've actually done an episode on PIM, have we? Yet?
No, not yet.
No.
Um,
So we should
I think,
definitely do one on PIM for sure.
yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I think
So,
that's pretty much it in terms of features. Yeah.
okay. So, is this a brand new product by Microsoft, or have they, acquired it?
Okay, so it used to be called Cloud Knox, and it's a recent Microsoft acquisition. I say recent; it's not actually that recent, but it is recent in terms of things. So it used to be called Cloud Knox. Microsoft acquired it. I don't know how much they acquired it for. Alan, can you remember how much they acquired it for?
Nope.
A
I
lot,
know. Yeah, a lot of money probably,
a lot of
and
money.
I think it was about a year ago that they
Yeah,
acquired it.
yeah, and it's so they've they acquired this product, Cloud Knox, and now they've sort of now with the new Entra umbrella, as we'll call it, it's been sort of pushed into Entra. I'll call it pushed into Entra because yeah, one thing to for every, sort of heads up for everyone, is the branding is still very much Cloud Knox brown branding, isn't it? Right? You the interface that it takes you to is not, it doesn't feel like Portal, does it? It's a different like UI, and it's as you have like sub portals, for say like Purview and like the Purview portal and things like that are like sub portals inside of the Azure portal. It's not really like that either. It's a completely different look, when you go in there, and the URLs are like still Cloud Knox URLs at the moment and things like that. So it's definitely a connection in terms of licensing and onboarding, in terms of bring it into Entra, but it's still it's still working itself out as a Microsoft product, if that makes sense. Not from a functionality perspective. I think we're all pretty happy that the functionality is absolutely top notch, once you get it connected and things like that. But you are going to be taken to another portal space that isn't going to feel as sort of, at home to you as the Azure portal, to use it to start off with.
Yeah, I think they wanted to get that core functionality because of the benefit you gain from it, and rather than hiding it for another 6 to 12 months whilst they build interfaces etc to it. I think
Yeah,
it's yeah,
I completely agree with you. We've gained the GA functionality as soon as we possibly can, right? And I'm sure over time that will all be dragged into Microsoft, Azure branding, and Portal, the look and feel of Portal. You know,
yeah.
um,
It'll probably move into the Entra portal, won't it, as a native UI to it rather
yeah,
than it bouncing you out for now.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like it's kind of, I see it might turn out like like I was mentioning around like the Purview and Azure Data Factory. When you open the Azure Data Factory like Studio, it's like it isn't Azure Portal. It's like a sub portal, if that makes sense. So I've kind of got a feeling it's going to end up like that, but at the moment it doesn't even feel. And I think as well, I'm not criticizing that it doesn't feel like that, but I feel as well because it has got a lot of value in it. There's a lot of screens, there's a lot of reports and things like that.
Yeah.
It is going to be a bit of a beast to like reskin and make it feel, like Portal for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we kind of talked a little bit about permissions creep. Why is it an issue? Why do I care?
Why do you care about permissions creep, Alan?
I
You
do
sound like
care,
a
but like
customer.
you
Yeah,
know,
I know. Yeah, yeah. So why is permissions creep an issue? Okay, so maybe we build our evergreen cloud infrastructure with all the best intentions in the world, and we build a lovely landing zones with our cloud adoption framework, and we've really thought about X, Y, and Z, and in terms of infrastructure and structure inside of our cloud environments. But what can happen as people join, leave, and move around the business? And this kind of really aligns to sort of an IAM and JML sort of process as well, right? But if you imagine, somebody's moved between, say, departments in the business. Let's say you've got technical people that are working on different parts of the product that you work on. Maybe Alan is a back end developer that used to work on your payment system, and then they went to work on the website, and then they went to work on, I don't know, your new NFT project that you've just like wheeled out the door, right? Like whatever it is, right? Over time, it could become that Alan could be, say, you know um first job role that Alan had, he needed access to one or two subscriptions. Then he's gone to a second role or second department that he's working in. Then he needs two more. Have you revoked those two previous? Because it's not really usually set up in such a fine grain way as, say, identity, groups for access to applications and things like that. With identity, these permissions are generally given like via the portal at as and when they're needed. But like, sorry, yeah, go on now.
I was gonna say, well, I need access to both because I'm transitioning. I need to, hand over to the team, so I need
Exactly. Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I
So yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
need that.
And that happens so often, doesn't it? Like that is almost a daily occurrence, right? And what we've I think a big thing that we've come to learn about cloud infrastructure is that sometimes things can be done in cloud infrastructure because changes to cloud infrastructure are relatively easy, especially when it comes to RBAC and permissions and all of that sort of stuff, right? Things are usually done out of necessity, right? So, like, there's a terminal issue with this. Alan's brought in at the last minute on a Friday night because something's down. He's been given owner access for the weekend so that he can come in and fix it, like a white knight that comes in and fixes the problem. But then is there somebody on the other side of that cleaning that up afterwards? And what we can find, it's very similar to like the remediations that we have to do with clients in the cloud environments, is that we need to be able to monitor for when those things happen and be able to like send in a cleanup team afterwards, to make sure that you know because I think the because of the nature of permissions in the cloud, they are so granular at multiple levels. Almost having this viewpoint, like being able to discover what's happened, is multi-layered and complex, right? Which is why which is so Alan's basically moving between these teams. I'm not saying you do actually do this, Alan. I'm just using you as like as an example. But Alan's move,
Yeah,
you're the butt of my,
I'm the
yeah,
customer. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
or the
exactly.
organization.
But Alan's moved between three teams, and now he's got access to six subscriptions. When actually maybe he should only have access to one or two or none at all. Maybe he's now in a completely different team and he doesn't even need access to Azure anymore, right? Is somebody going in there to clean up? Is somebody managing the change process for that? Have you got a massively strict change control process where even RBAC roles need to go through change, and is it put in the change log? Is somebody, there's just many reasons why those things can get missed. So that's just a really simple example of how permissions creep can actually occur. And like Alan alluded to earlier, people just flat out lying about the permissions that they need, right? Saying I need access to this when they actually don't, and things like that. So permissions creep, can be, and especially when we're talking about, we'll call it like VIPs, and your the sorts of people that manage your cloud environments are probably pretty like scary identities in your business, right? They usually wield a lot of power. They've got like access to things that maybe just regular people in your organization don't. So if those people who have already got access to a lot of things creep into even other areas, it can become very nasty very quickly. So that's why we don't want this to spiral out of control. We don't want it to get to a stage where somebody is like a super user at all times, and be able to just wield the permissions like at will. Permissions should be justified and enforced, from both giving people permissions, because we always talk a lot about authorizing permissions changes, but then is there as much care and detail going into cleaning up old permissions after their access they're given, if that makes sense. I don't know if you've got anything else to add on that, Alan, about permissions creep.
No, I was going to say about people getting high, super user access. It's all quite a lot of time. It's not like you said. It's sometimes not intentional. Sometimes people want to keep their permissions because they want to feel empowered. But also a lot of this is done by stealth because it is that not granular, but piecemeal sort of. It's here and there. Talk to different people. They give you different permissions. They don't know about the other ones, etc.
Yeah,
Sort of thing. So
yeah,
it
yeah,
is good to
and
see all that.
yeah, and I think as well, when you have maybe you've got enough subscriptions where you've got different owners for different subscriptions, they can also grant, because they are like literally the role owner, they can grant access to like effectively anybody else inside of their scoped area of permission. So it might, like you just said, like stealth IT happening. It's like I don't talk to IT, I just go straight to the owner, because like, well, you go straight to the owner. Let's say I'm the owner and Alan comes to me and goes, hey, I need a blob reader for 3 days, or blob writer, so I can upload some things to the storage account, and then I just never take it away from Alan ever again, because I'm off doing my job and moving on with my things. So it's just it's then good if we've got a tool to come in and identify when that happens, not to call people out, but just to show the risk of certain people in the organization. Because usually when you get shown what your permissions creep index is, you're like, hey, yeah, I don't need half of that, and so it's there documented in front of you.
Okay. That's yeah. There's a lot. You could talk about that for quite some time as well, couldn't we?
Yeah,
Even.
permissions creep.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Just RBAC. Yeah, it's. I don't want to get to. I
no.
want to keep it thingy, but yeah, it's definitely a problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely a problem.
Yeah, and we see it in other environments, Active Directory and other applications, etc. It's not just the clouds, but we
Yeah,
see it's just more complex in the clouds, I think, because
yeah,
of the
exactly.
how much you can do. But
Yeah.
okay, so we've kind of talked about the product, but we haven't really talked about onboarding, sort of experience or what you can do. So, what environments? Because it is cloud environments. What environments can we connect to it?
So in the scope of permissions management is Microsoft Azure. Obviously, it'd be a bit weird if it didn't support Azure. Obviously, AWS and GCP, Google Cloud Platform. So what? Because this is obviously a, well, Microsoft are going down a multi-cloud route anyway, right? It's everywhere for Microsoft, right? It's like, it doesn't matter if we've got your workloads, we'll try and charge you something to to manage in other things, right? There's always roads that lead back to Azure. That's like, they've grown up in terms of understanding that people and teams are going to want to use other cloud providers, right? Maybe not out of want, or maybe it might be necessity. They might have a specific technology, that you might be a you might use heavy use of TensorFlow, and you might decide that the GCP has got some great tooling around that, right? Um, let's say you run a Kubernetes cluster, and then maybe GCP, like all your ops guys all know GCP, so that's what you put your Kubernetes cluster on. But then you have, say, maybe you've got a CDN deal that backs onto S3, so you've got some, like, that can just happen because it's so easy to like create accounts and then do things like that, right? So more and more, companies are multi-cloud, um, a lot of out of necessity, not just wanting to do that. So Microsoft have got that now, that now they've obviously acquired CloudNox and turned it into Entra permissions management. They've got that ability because that piece of tooling was built from the ground up to be multi-cloud enabled.
Okay, so how easy? It's always the question. It's great that they can connect, but actually, we were talking about it with Defender for Cloud last week. How it's got easier to do the onboarding, things like that. So how easy is it to onboard some of not to say, well, I guess the different clouds.
You'll have to give me your viewpoint of other clouds, because in my environment, I've only scanned my Azure, which
Okay.
was incredibly simple to set up. AKA, just like connect it, like, just as long as you've got the permissions to connect it. It was a bit confusing when I set it up because it asked me to run a script that I didn't need to run like that. It was a bit strange, but yeah. But in terms of how easy it was to start gaining insights, as long as you've got the permissions to do the connection, you're up and away. And I believe for AWS and GCP, they give you all the scripts ready to go, to do that connection, kind of like Defender for Cloud. I think is that right, Alan?
Yeah, there's a few things. So I don't think I've connected GCP up yet, but AWS is using Cloud Formations again.
Okay.
Um, there's two or three of them you have to do to deploy. There's a bit of config. Um, it's all documented by Microsoft. It's not as simple as Defender for Cloud, but it's doing a lot more. So
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
it's slightly different. But
Yeah. So
yeah,
so relatively easy to do that, and they're going to give you the guidance and as much of the scripting automated for you, right?
yeah,
Ready to go. Yeah, definitely. Cool.
yeah. Okay, so we've got it all connected. Um, how much is it going to cost me?
Well,
What's the licensing?
this is the question that we always come back to. Okay, so to me, there was a little bit of confusion around pricing originally, right? And I don't know whether this is the change they've locked into this now. But the pricing, as of today and as of the website, is per user based per month license, and I believe that is the cost per user that is discovered, those identities that are discovered in those cloud environments. So before, I believe it was done by resource, wasn't it? They were talking about doing it by resource. Is that
Yeah,
right, Alan? I can't
yeah.
remember,
There was
but
talk about
so UK pricing is £7.90 per user per month. I assume that rounds up to 9.99 maybe for USD, potentially somewhere in that sort of region. Um, but what is quite advantageous and quite nice is there is a 90-day free trial, and for that initial sort of discovery engagement, understanding what is there and what is wrong, that is plenty of time to get yourself connected to it and to start to glean some of those insights. Um, I'm not saying that you would want to cancel it after the 90 days and not continue, but that 90-day trial is very, very nice of Microsoft to give you that amount of time to work through that, right? Because in 90 days, effectively 3 months, you could probably get your discovery done. If you're just Azure, you could get your discovery done in a few days, couldn't you? And that's probably just waiting for things to refresh more than it is actually doing the connection. It's obviously massive caveat, depends how big you are, right? Like, yeah, it could take longer. Um, but you could probably say, with the right access, especially if you were doing it for your own organization, right? It's a bit different for Alan and I when we're talking to customers, getting people aligned, at customer side, getting them bought into it, then getting access assigned, getting everybody on the page, and it can take a little bit longer. But if you're championing something like this internally, and you have the access to do it, and you've obviously got the approval to run a tool like this, um, then 90 days is going to give you a lot of time to 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 discover and to even start remediating, right? It's just, if you feel like the continuous monitoring is important to you, that's when it's going to kick into the £7.90 per user per month. I think it's also worth noting about is the crossover between their just-in-time access and PIM as well, because um, effectively it's kind of the same functionality as PIM, right? That's in this product as well. So if you're licensed to a level where you can have PIM anyway, that might detract a little bit from the value of this ongoing product, because it's just going to give you visibility, um, and remediation, I suppose, right? Going on in the future.
Yeah, I mean the just in time access. I mean, when we talk about it in a future episode, um, it
Spoiler
does.
alert.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, it does Azure quite well from a resource perspective, and it can. Again, we'll talk about it in another episode, but it can do the other clouds, but not probably at the granular level, or as maybe as easy as permissions management
Yeah.
might be able to, because it's directly connecting to it. And
Yeah.
again, we'll talk about that in the future
Okay.
episode.
Yeah. Yeah, but it is just worth people knowing that there is a bit of an overlap there in
Yeah.
terms of functionality, right? And like you say, there are nuances to both sides of that. But if you're not yeah, so yeah, we'll go through that in that episode. Is there any other questions or anything else you want to cover, Alan, on permissions management?
We did onboarding. We've done some of the other stuff. We said where it came from. Um, I've not seen anything. So from a product development side of things, I've not directly seen anything they're looking to add to it. But I've heard rumors about theirs. They've got a product roadmap, a private preview roadmap for it. So
Okay.
even though it's kind of amazing at the moment, they're thinking of other things to add to it, and that might be maybe at a guess, I would think the PIM part might merge with
Okay.
the current,
Yeah.
the other part to kind of be a single product. Maybe from an interface perspective, it's the same. It's a single product,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, but actually back end it's different sort of thing. But
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
how I
It
would
is.
see it. So that's an opinion of mine. Not don't know anything what they're doing.
No, no, and really, this permissions management to us is and to everybody else, it's very new, isn't it? Right? It's only GA'd in June, I think. Was it June or July? In
July,
the
1st July
UK,
or something like that. Yeah.
it took a little bit longer for in the EU. Um, so it is a GA product, and it's also a large product to learn as well. There's a lot in there. From a pulling out the insights from it. Um, I'm not going to say that the interface isn't bad at all. I think it's just portraying permissions creep is actually quite complex, because there is a lot of granular detail there. So,
Yeah.
so in permissions management, there are lots of screens and reports and drill downs into detailed views and things like that. So, I do think it's definitely not a set and forget. That's for sure. It requires somebody that is skilled in permissions management to go in and understand the insights that are in there. It does create this permissions creep index, which allows you to hunt in and zone in on certain identities that may have lots of permissions. So that's really powerful. But it isn't just a with a lot of these tools, it's always going to come back to requiring somebody to champion in the product, become an SME in it, to understand how it works and to how best to get value out of it. There may also be things that we've completely missed as well, because our exploration of permissions management has been relatively small on the grand scheme of things, right? So far. So yeah, like definitely go check it out. It's definitely worth activating your 90-day trial on your own, like dev tenants, to see how it works and how you connect and things like that. Because there you can definitely glean some really valuable insights from it.
Yeah, and I think from the continuous management of it, I think you're right. You do probably do need some uh, a couple of people to look after it, but I think that initial um, discovery and remediation is going to be your
Without a doubt.
biggest bit, and
Yeah,
then just seeing it that creep or that change is going to be minor work at that point. So
yeah,
I don't think it's going to
yeah.
be a beast all the time, providing you keep up with it.
No, no, but there's probably a lot of permissions debt, as I'll call it, that you might need to go and clean up that you've found, right? So it might also be that if you are starting it might not seem like it's worth it even when you're relatively small, but in order to keep things in check so things don't spiral out of control, because so many times we've talked to people saying, yeah, it's just got a bit out of hand. Do you know what I mean? And the amount of work that it then takes to right that ship, afterwards, it can almost be too much sometimes, right? Because it can cost a lot of time and money to fix these things in the future, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Okay, so I think that was good. So let's do a reflection and see if I've got everything.
Excellent.
So permissions management or Entra permissions management was previously um, a product called CloudKnox. So it's been out for years, and Microsoft acquired it and brought it into the ecosystem of Entra. Um, it its features, main benefits and features are that it can do discovery of permissions against Azure, AWS, and GCP. It can continuously review those permissions over time that it's running, so you can see that permission creep and changes. And it's also able to manage those permissions, so deploy new roles based on the information it's collected on a user or subset of users on what they actually use, but also give the ability to do just-in-time access to some of those roles and be able to do approval processes and elevate as you need it. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, sounds great to me. And yeah, and I think once we've had some time with the product, maybe we'll come and revisit it, to sort of glean some of our learnings and our tips and tricks from it. Once we start to properly align with it and start using it a little bit more. Okay, Alan, that's great. I had on target 45 minutes. We're up to 43 minutes. So I think for the first time ever, we might actually come in under time, which is great. Alan, what's the next episode that we're going to record?
Well, let's see. What have we been talking about? Yes, so we're going to be doing Entra Azure AD. We did an episode on it in general, but actually, I'm going to talk about the identity governance piece. So that's going to talk about entitlement management, access reviews, and privileged identity management. Conveniently,
Okay, great. Perfect. So yeah, so if you want to also see the other side of that just in time access, the next episode is definitely going to be for you. Cool. So, yeah, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to listen to more of this sort of content in the future. We have many topics that we'd like to cover, and your listens and support is what will continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
we also have the ability for you to give us feedback. Did you enjoy this episode? Is there bits you want us to dive into more? Um, Yep. So if you want to give us some feedback, then if you look in our show notes for this episode, there is a link in there which will take you to a form, and we'll get that feedback.
Cool, great. Well, thanks very much for asking questions of me, Alan. I'm glad I got through them with your approval, so that's always great. And yeah, thanks everybody for listening. And if you've got to the end, yeah, we'll catch you on the next one. Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Speak to you soon. Bye.